Hello, everyone. Welcome in.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're gonna just give it another couple minutes for folks to log in, and then we'll get started. Hey, good evening, everyone. We're gonna go ahead and get started. My name is Stephen Payne, as probably some of you know, maybe many of you, and I'm the director of the Bronx County Historical Society. And thank you so much for choosing to spend tonight with us on this cold but luckily slightly warmer than it has been night tonight. As many of you know, the Bronx County Historical Society offers regular programming each week. And if this is your first time joining us, we hope to see you at future events, both online and in person. We kind of move all around the Bronx, mostly the Bronx, but we are have some online events. Not as many as we used to have, I think, during COVID, but we still have probably at least one or two a month. So thank you for joining us tonight. You can sign up for our newsletter and see our upcoming events at bronxhistory.org. Tonight, we gather to revisit a pivotal chapter in our history, the Civil Rights Movement, but through a lens that's often been overlooked. We're here to correct the record, to move beyond the male-centric narratives that have traditionally defined this era, and to shine a light on the indispensable architects of change, Black women. From the strategic brilliance behind the bus boycotts to the quiet, sustained labor that kept the movement alive, their stories are the bedrock of our freedom, yet they remain frequently absent from the mainstream historical account. To guide us through this vital reexamination, we're honored to welcome a historian whose work aligns perfectly with the Bronx County Historical Society's focus on rigorous scholarship and community empowerment. Our speaker holds undergraduate degrees in historical studies and Africana studies from Bard College, complemented by an intensive 2-year post-baccalaureate program. But her expertise extends far beyond the classroom. She spent years working within archives across New York State and Ohio, digging deep into primary sources to recover lost voices. Through various archival fellowships, as well as teaching workshops, they actively empower Black and Brown communities to conduct their own genealogical research, operating on the belief that oral history and family archives are just as critical as institutional records. Their work reminds us that history is not just what is written in textbooks, it is what is remembered, spoken, and preserved by all of us. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Talaya, who will be speaking on the enduring impact of Black women in the civil rights movement and the urgent necessity of reclaiming our narratives. Borrowing from Kay Kennedy Widers at Columbia University, Talaya will be lecturing with her camera off to give an immersive feel of a podcast and will come on camera to field questions. Please hold your questions or comments until after Talaya has finished. Thank you.
All right, good evening, everyone. So I will be going off camera now. So thank you so much for that introduction, Dr. Payne. Happy Black History Month, everyone. So my name is Talaya the Hood Historian, and I'm just so excited to be closing out the last week of Black History Month by highlighting the contributions of some fantastic Black women who helped make the Civil Rights Movement the success that it was, and to talk about how their work continues to influence and inspire social and political movements today. With a focus on Baton Rouge and the Montgomery bus boycotts in particular, some of the women you will hear about tonight will be Georgia Gilmore, Rosa Parks, Claudette Colvin, Joanne Robinson, Leah Chase, and Martha White. Some of their names you may know, and some of them you may not. And this is done on purpose. History often prioritizes the stories of men, and because they are often in more enthralling roles, like the reverend, the lawyer, the judge, and the politician, and other faces of the movement. This reflects the time period, as women were often boxed out of these fields and pushed into careers that reinforced gender and racial boxes, such as maids, cooks, secretaries, seamstresses, and nurses. Because of these seemingly mundane roles, we rarely hear about the influence that women had on social movements of their time. In fact, these roles were a huge driving force in society because without their work, the economy would take a huge hit. Many of these women will also go on to create their own businesses that served as third spaces, becoming organizing centers for community leaders and for strategic planning. They would build the foundations for what we know today as grassroots fundraising and organizing, food sovereignty, and community building. We can even see the influences of women in popular culture. Take a look at this clip, for example.
Gumbo smells good, Tiana.
I think it's done, Daddy.
Yeah, are you sure?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely positive.
Yes. Done.
Mm.
What?
Well, sweetheart, this is the best gumbo I've ever tasted. Come here. You told our little girl got a gift.
I could have told you that.
A gift this special just gotta be shared.
Everybody? Oh.
I got some hush puppies, Tiana. You know the thing about good food? It brings folks together from all walks of life. It warms them right up and it puts little smiles on their faces.
Now, if you are unfamiliar with the Disney film The Princess and the Frog, I will give you a short synopsis. Tiana is then inspired to open her own restaurant in New Orleans, but of course, she has to get into a lot of whimsical Disney magic in between. For those of you who have seen the film, it may surprise you to know that Tiana is actually inspired by a real person, Leah Chase, who was the co-owner of Dookie Chase, a popular Creole restaurant in New Orleans and a known political organizing safe haven. Leah Chase was born in 1923 in Madisonville, Louisiana. Growing up, it was common for the local Creoles of color to go work at any of the local sewing factories in New Orleans after graduating high school. However, that wasn't the path that she wanted for herself. So, despite her parents' wishes, she went to work as a waitress in the French Quarter. She would go on to develop a passion for cooking and wanted to cultivate a restaurant that was as beautiful, welcoming, and reflective of Black culture as she had seen at the white restaurants in the quarter. Her dream began to come to fruition when she met her husband, Edward Dookie Chase Jr., in 1945. He was a musician and the son of a successful business owner in the quarter. Leah greatly admired her mother-in-law, Emily, and was eager to volunteer at the then humble tavern. One of the first things she wanted to do was transform the menu from casual bar eats to fine dining. At first, patrons weren't so keen on the changes, but as Leah adapted the menu, incorporating more Creole recipes, business began to thrive and she knew her dreams were possible. In 1946, she and Dookie Jr. became co-owners and transformed the business into the restaurant we know today as Dookie Chase's. Because of the precedent that Leah's mother-in-law, Emily, had set within the community by being a safe haven for Black folks to commune and having built a rapport with local law enforcement by giving them plates of food when they were on beat, Dookie Chase's also became a meeting ground for organizers. Different sectors of the civil rights movement, like the Freedom Riders, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and even white allies were allowed to come and organize. This was especially dangerous due to segregation laws in the South. Organizers were able to strategize without the fear of being surveilled or raided in an upstairs room of the restaurant over bowls of Leah's famous gumbo. Although law enforcement eventually learned of these gatherings, they couldn't shut down the restaurant without risking retaliation from the community. With organizers able to gather here without interruption, they learned from the success of the Baton Rouge bus boycotts and applied those lessons to their own organizing of the Montgomery bus boycotts. Leah Chase knew that her and her husband's restaurant changed the course of the movement, and she would say so herself in a PBS documentary done on her life. In Jim Crow South, all public spaces were segregated. The degree of segregation looked different depending on the state you were residing in, but modes of transportation were a big point of contention throughout the South. Louisiana's bus system, particularly in Baton Rouge, had over 40 different Black-owned bus companies that competed for business in the city due to the racism of the white bus drivers on public transportation. This caused a huge financial strain on the city, as Black people were 80% of the folks who took buses. This prompted white bus drivers to lobby to have the city revoke the licenses of Black-owned companies and enter into an exclusive contract with the city. This would be enforced in 1950, forcing Black bus riders to depend on city transportation. Black riders were forced to enter through the back of the bus, sent only in the rear, even if seats up front were empty, and were subjected to racial violence without any protection from the city. In February 1953, the bus company asked the city council for a fare increase. Reverend T.J. Jemison of Mount Zion First Baptist Church, the largest Black church in Louisiana, was in attendance and appealed for Black passengers to have the right to sit in any available seats, especially if they were all paying the same price. The city approved Ordinance 222, which stated that although the city passed this, it was not enforced, and that stated all riders will be seated on a first-come, first-served basis, and it still had to be filled from front to back. Although it was passed, it was not enforced, and many bus drivers did not comply with this new policy. In addition, the news of this ordinance was not widely spread, so many of the general public were unaware. The tides would turn soon thanks to the bravery of Martha White. Martha White was born on April 2nd, 1922, in Woodsville, Mississippi. She was the daughter of sharecroppers and would leave home as a teenager for Baton Rouge to begin a new life. She would sustain herself as a housekeeper, working all day on her feet, walking several miles to reach her clients' homes and to the bus stops before heading home. On June 14th, 1953, she boarded her usual bus on her way home, taking a seat at the front of a nearly full bus. At the next stop, more white passengers began to board, and the bus drivers demanded that she give up her seat. Well within her rights, thanks to Ordinance 222, she refused. Another Black woman would sit beside her in solidarity. Outraged, the bus driver refused to continue along the route and called the Baton Rouge police to have them removed. Witnesses notified Reverend Jemison of the unfolding situation, and he arrived on site simultaneously with the police. He argued that both women were well within their rights under the new ordinance, and he prevented their arrest. The driver was suspended, sparking outrage amongst the white city bus drivers and prompting over 100 drivers to strike. 4 days later, the Attorney General will overturn Ordinance 222, ruling that it was illegal because it wasn't in alignment with Louisiana's laws on racial segregation. This would not stand within the Black community. On June 19th, Reverend Jennison gathered his congregation and made a public announcement on the radio that a bus boycott would begin on June 20th. He pleaded with the Black community not to ride the buses the next day and assured them that free transportation would be provided. Thanks to the contributions of local businesses that donated gas, community members who volunteered for shifts driving that started as early as 5 a.m. and ended as late as midnight, the United Defense League that provided free legal counsel, and all 70 cars used during that time, the boycott was a success. It is said that almost 100% of Black residents participated in the boycott. The Baton Rouge Bus Company was losing about $1,600 per day, which today is around $19,000, and was feeling the financial pressures that would come with the absence of the Black dollar. It took them less than a week to reach the compromise that will become Ordinance 251. This would remove the first come, first served policy and instead reserve the first 4 rows of the bus, splitting them between white and Black riders, which to me just showcases the hoops they would jump through to uphold white supremacy, because that makes absolutely no sense. While many wanted to continue boycotting, the majority approved this ordinance and it passed. The boycott was called off on June 25th, 1953. While this boycott was short-lived, it provided organizers in other Southern states with a blueprint for successfully fighting segregation laws. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. met with Jemison at Dookie Chase's to talk about the strategies and tactics they used during the boycott. I want to circle back to Martha White. When she refused to give up her seat, she set a precedent. Standing your ground gets a reaction and draws a crowd. And when you get other people to show solidarity with you in the process, then you can really make a statement about the power your community holds. When we tell the story of how the Montgomery bus boycott began, it often begins with the narrative that one day Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus after a long day of work. She was arrested, and that outrage prompted the bus boycott that would eventually lead to the desegregation of the bus system in Montgomery, Alabama. As history progressed and the elders who lived through the movement passed, oral histories will all but disappear, if they were present at all, documenting accurate timelines of what occurred during the movement. Using the story of Claudette Colvin as an example, the most common narrative that I hear is that she was the first young woman to refuse to give up her seat on a segregated bus. You may have also heard that due to her being a dark-skinned girl who was pregnant during the time of her resistance, she was not seen as fit to be the voice in the face of the Montgomery bus boycott. While I cannot deny that colorism and ageism played a part in who would be the face of the movement, creating the narrative that Claudette was the first to disrupt racism on a public bus before Rosa erases the courage of Martha, the continuous mistreatment of Black women, and the connection of community learning, inspiration, and the meticulous planning that goes into creating successful movements of resistance. This narrow view also keeps us from seeing the full picture that Claudette Colvin was actually a mentee of Rosa Parks. To give you all some background on Claudette, she was born September 5th, 1939 in Birmingham, Alabama. She and her family would later move to Montgomery, Alabama. As a teenager, she would occasionally attend NAACP youth council meetings, but wasn't heavily involved in the movement. However, during the Negro History Week of 1955, Claudette Colvin was in class learning about the ancestors, Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth, who had paved the way for us. On the way home from school with friends, they were asked to give up their seat for several white passengers. She refused. She would later say, I felt like Sojourner Truth was pushing down on one shoulder and Harriet Tubman was pushing down on the other, saying, "Sit down, girl." I was glued to my seat. When police arrived on the scene, she was forcibly removed from her seat and accused of resisting arrest, despite multiple eyewitnesses stating that she went limp when forced off the bus. She would be charged with 3 counts: disturbing the peace, breaking segregation laws, and assault. She would not go to trial until 2 months later in May. The judge assigned to her case only decided to charge her with assault and battery. She was also fined and declared a juvenile delinquent. Many adult organizers across various entities of the civil rights movement already viewed the youth as feisty, uncontrollable, and were quite frankly frightened by some of their actions. Leah Chase herself will even reflect on this feeling, listening to some of the SNCC organizing meetings. People my age were a bit frightened about it. It was so different from what we were trying to do. For instance, we were working with the NAACP, trying to work within the system, abide by the rules, don't offend this one, don't offend that one, and get it done. But then here come the young people in the movement. I listen in on the movements and what they do, and I say, oh my goodness, they're going to get in trouble. They're going to do this and they're going to do that. But then they did it, and they really taught me a lesson. Sometimes you just had to bam those down. Because of this sentiment and the court ruling, this would be the ultimate reason why leaders, specifically in the NAACP, would choose not to rally behind Claudette as the face of the movement. When she became pregnant later that summer, it reinforced that they made the right decision not to organize around her. However, Claudette's courage caught Rosa's attention. She saw Claudette for who she really was, a passionate, brave, and bright young woman who let the spirit of her ancestors guide her without the fear of consequences. A political disruptor whose influence would be needed to connect and inspire other youth. Parks took Claudette under her wing. She encouraged her participation in the NAACP Youth Council and later appointed her secretary. She will also have Colvin tell the story of why she refused to give up her seat and the impact of her arrest. To the end, she was sure her comrades were tired of hearing it. Parks understood the impact Colvin's courage could have on her counterparts and also wanted to nurture Colvin's spirit as an organizer. Parks was with Colvin every step of the way throughout her arrest, her trial, and the distress of the scandal that would be Colvin's teen pregnancy. Although Rosa has never publicly inserted into public memory that her actions on December 1st, 1955 were directly influenced by Claudette, it is clear that she carried her spirit, Martha's spirit, and the spirit of so many other Black women who were tired of being abused and mistreated while riding public transportation. While many know Rosa Parks for this iconic photograph after being arrested for refusing to give up her seat on her way home on December 1st, 1955, many don't know much else about her. Rosa is often painted as a soft, quiet, demure woman, when in reality, she was quite militant. When she wasn't working her day job as a seamstress, she was heavily involved in the NAACP, becoming the president of the Youth Council. She was an NAACP investigator, a voter advocate, and responsible for investigating cases regarding the rape and assault of Black women across the South, and would lead one of the most powerful anti-rape campaigns in the South. She was known for being very sharp-tongued by her peers, and because of the work that she conducted with the NAACP, she was very aware of the particular challenges that Black women faced in the South on top of dealing with racism. During her early years in Montgomery, she was deeply involved with an underground network of Black activists who were working to gain their rights to vote during a time where racist literacy tests were being implemented against Black voters. No matter if you passed the test, county registers would still fail you in order to maintain the racist status quo. After Rosa finally achieved voter status after her third time taking the test, she was immediately met with another racist reminder. When she boarded her usual bus home, headed towards Cleveland Avenue, she came in contact with one of Montgomery's most notoriously racist and misogynistic bus drivers, who I will not be naming because honestly, his name doesn't deserve to live on. He and Rosa engaged in a heated exchange after wanting her to enter through the back of the bus right after she just entered through the front. When she refused to re enter, he lunged at her, grabbed her by the sleeve, and proceeded to drag her off the bus. She would recall saying, "I know one thing, you better not hit me. I told y'all Rosa was feisty." As the bus pulled away, I imagine that Rosa made a promise to herself that she was going to get her lick back against the man who tainted what was supposed to be a victorious day. As Rosa became more involved in the community, she began to build strong bonds, especially because so many came to her in their times of need, particularly the women. She would become close allies with the Women's Political Council of Montgomery, more commonly known as the WPC. In 1955, the chapter was run by Joanne Robinson, an English professor at Alabama State College. Joanne, born on April 17, 1912, had her fair share of racist run-ins on public transportation. In 1949, she was publicly berated by a bus driver to sit in the fifth row of an empty bus. When she became president of WPC in 1950, she made desegregating public transport her top priority. 5 years later, after she became president, she kickstarted the revolution. Now, many historians argue whether or not the actions of Rosa Parks were planned on December 5th, but I believe that they were. In fact, I believe that this is the exact face that Rosa most likely made when she entered that bus. Sorry, I had to insert a little Gen Z humor. When she boarded that Cleveland Avenue bus that cold December morning, Rosa came into contact with an old nemesis. That same racist bus driver that threw her off the bus in 1943 after she gained the right to vote. He might not have remembered her, but I'm sure she remembered him. Even though she sat in the middle of the bus, it wasn't long before she was asked to give up her seat for a white rider. She refused, even after being verbally berated, and was arrested. After hearing the news of Rosa's arrest through the organizers' pipeline, Joanne immediately sprang into action, mobilizing all members of the Women's Political Council. Using resources at Alabama State University, they were able to print and distribute over 50,000 posters calling for every Black person to stay off the buses on Monday, a symbolic gesture to Rosa's scheduled court date. The flyer would read, "This is for Monday, December 5th, 1955. Another Negro woman has been arrested and thrown into jail because she refused to get up out of her seat on the bus for a white person to sit down. It is the second time that Claudette Kerber, a typo, calls the case that a Negro woman has been arrested for the same thing. This has to be stopped. Negroes have rights too. For if Negroes did not ride the bus, they could not operate. 3/4 of the riders are Negroes, yet we are arrested or have to stand over empty seats. If we do not do something to stop these arrests, they will continue. The next time it may be you or your daughter or your mother. This woman's case will come up on Monday. We are therefore asking every Negro to stay off the buses Monday in order to protest of the arrest and trial. Don't ride the buses to work, to town, to school, or anywhere on Monday. You can afford to stay out of school for one day if you have no other way to go except by bus. You can also afford to stay out of town for one day. If you work, take a cab or walk. But please, children and grown-ups, don't ride the bus at all on Monday. Please stay off all buses on Monday." Later that night, in the basement of Mount Zion AME Zion Church, because Black people love a long church name, Fred Gray, E.D. Nixon, Ralph Abernathy, Reverend Ian French, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and several other ministers all gathered to form the Montgomery Improvement Association, more commonly known as the MIA. I want it noted that Joanna had previously proposed a boycott to many of these pastors and was turned down, most decisively by E.D. Nixon. I can only imagine the shock and anger she must have felt later that night during a meeting of thousands in the annex of Holt Street Baptist Church when it was announced that MIA would be leading the boycott with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as its president. Joanne will recount that the men took it over. They had definitely decided to assume leadership. E.D. Nixon would even say during the meeting that we've worn the aprons all our lives. It's time to take the aprons off. If we're going to be men, now's the time to be men. I wasn't there, but I can imagine the internal silent screaming that must have been happening as many women wearing those aprons sat in those pews every Sunday, contributing to the churches and running those very organizations that made the boycott happen. Although Rosa and Joanne would not be included in the initial assimilation of the MIA, they would become a part of the executive committee, and she would later quote this in her memoir. The MIA presidency demanded trained leadership and full-time work. The president and other officers had to devote much or most of their time to these tasks. Therefore, we felt it would be better if the ministers held the most visible leadership positions. The MIA president, with his committee, had to make decisions to be presented to the masses whose confidence in him was most important. Note how she highlights that Dr. King did not make decisions that were presented to the masses without the input of his committee, which she sat on. The Montgomery bus boycott lasted 381 days. With over 40,000 people depending on the buses for transportation, this was an amazing feat. While MIA used tactics from the Baton Rouge boycott, it lasted 5 days. So, how did the citizens of the Montgomery bus boycott create the resources to sustain themselves for over a year without crossing the picket line? Well, first, Black cab drivers offered fares for the same price as the buses at the time, which was around 10 cents, to Black commuters. Regular community meetings were held to strategize ways to organize and maintain morale, and at the center of it all was Georgia Gilmore in the Club from Nowhere. Georgia Gilmore was born February 5th, 1920, and was a Montgomery, Alabama native. She had many jobs throughout her life. She worked as a laundress, she was a railroad worker, a midwife, but the one thing that brought her the greatest joy was being a cook. She herself had been arrested once after an altercation with a racist bus driver and was instantly on board to contribute to the movement. And for those who knew Georgia, when she set her mind to something, it was best to get out her way. Using her talents as a cook, she gathered women from all over the city of Montgomery to form the Club from Nowhere. The name was a way to keep the secrecy of its members. Members would sell plates of soul food, sweet potato pies, cakes, and other pastries during Monday mass meetings to raise funds for the movement. Eventually, the sales became so popular that it drew both Black and white crowds, with people waiting for the women to set up. People would wait patiently for them to tally up the funds at the end of the night, and they would even receive standing ovations for the money they raised. They would make up to $200 a week, which is equivalent to about $2,000 today, with one of their biggest sales being $2,000 in one night, which is about $20,000 today. The money will fund carpools comprising of over 300 vehicles, bail funds, security for leaders of the movement, and what we know today as mutual aid funds for folks who were fined or fired for participating in the boycott. As Georgia began to gain notoriety for her food, she would be fired from her day job at the National Lunch Company. Without missing a beat, she turned her side gig into a full blown operation out of her own home, which people flocked to. When those who opposed the boycott caught wind of this, they tried to throw everything at Georgia. They tried to shut down her business by insisting that her kitchen was not up to code. Knowing how valuable Georgia was to the movement, Martin Luther King Jr. quickly gave her the money to bring her home kitchen up to city code so she could continue her business and to provide the support needed for the club from nowhere. The boycott officially ended on December 20th, 1956, after the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the case filed, by the city of Montgomery that bus segregation violated the Due Process and Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment and ended bus segregation in the city. On December 21st, 1956, for the first time in over a year, Black passengers would board the public bus of Montgomery, Alabama, sitting wherever they pleased, surrounded by cameras documenting the historic moment. If this talk has taught you nothing, I hope that it taught you women get shit done. I absolutely love telling the stories of these young Black ladies and women. I wish that when I was younger, I saw myself reflected more in history. And I know that so many Black women feel the same way. The more we see ourselves represented and have a clearer understanding of the way we work together and not as separate individuals, but actually build long lasting sisterhoods, we see how patriarchal views also shape our historical lenses. I will leave us with some parting words from Sister Gilmore.
Would you say it's true that Black women in Montgomery were really very important in keeping the boycott going?
Yes, they were.
Why would you say that?
Because see, they were maid cooks, and they was the one that really and truly kept the bus running. And after the maids and the cooks stopped riding the bus, well, the bus didn't have any need to run because the majority of the maids was in Cloverdale and Capitol Heights and Oak Park. And so instead of riding the bus, they would walk. And then they began to form a carpool. And once the carpool began, they lost completely interest in the bus. So that's why the bus boycott was a success.
Thank you all so much for joining Power in the Mundane, How Maids Cooks in a Bowl of Gumbo Changed the World. I hope you enjoyed it. I wanted to keep it short. I didn't want to keep y'all here all night. So I'll be taking questions now. Please make sure to scan this QR code for the survey. I'll also be sending out an email after this talk. And yeah, this is also a bonus picture of me outside of Dookie Chase's.
Great, thank you so much. And folks, if you all have questions, comments, you can feel free to add them in the Q&A, or if you'd like to ask your question live, we can give you permission to talk as well. Okay, we have one question so far. I'm gonna go ahead and give Sage, let me see here.
Hi, I don't know if you hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Wonderful presentation, wonderful. Thank you, Talaya. Um, my question is about Rosa Parks. I didn't know, I learned from this presentation about her work, like her anti-rape work and her, work across the country. So I'm very curious about um the work that she did within the movement, especially with the Black men of the civil rights movement, if she did any particular internal things that had to do kind of against violence against women, anti-rape when it came to that, because I think you touched upon a lot of the misogyny that happens within the movement. And I think when you learn about different movements that, are Black men are kind of pushed to the forefront. So I'm very curious about the work that Rosa Parks did inside the movement as she was kind of, one of few women that were given a platform, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Are you more so asking what work that she did that was anti-misogynistic or about the campaign that she led that was against rape?
I think I'm curious about both, but I also
Mhm.
understand that there were um, like sexual assault and harassment that happened within the movement by the men, by certain men of the movement as well. So I'm curious about
Mm,
like those intersections of was she
mhm,
having those conversations with the men in those movement if she were like if there's any type of like documentation or any information that you know about that
mhm.
or could lead me to possibly.
Yeah, I will say when it came to her work against like anti-rape and sexual assault cases, she was more so interested in what it looked like when it came to white men, and she was always explicit about that whenever she did it. One of her biggest campaign was against the case that happened to Reese Taylor, and I can put that in the chat. Um, oh, I think it's in. Hopefully it did. But it was about Reese Taylor. I don't see her much more so talking about it within the community. I've always seen her discuss it outside of the community, specifically with white men and interracial relationships.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Okay, looks like there's one comment from Nancy Martinez. Just wanted to say how wonderful this was.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, other questions, comments, anything that folks would like to know more about, things that folks learn that they'd like to share. Talia, I have a question for you if that's all right.
Hmm.
So in all the research that you've done on this, are there like, one or two really amazing archival sources that have stuck with you, that you either didn't expect to find or things that surprised you, things like that?
Oh my gosh, one of my favorite archives is actually the SNCC Digital Gateway. They are one of the few archives I feel like that exist that are really extensive that talk about the civil rights movement. I think it's very upsetting that most archives that exist that are around the civil rights movement and most of the collections are either named after Rosa Parks or named after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. There's not many that exist that surround anyone else. Like even when I was going through to find more photographs when I do this talk, when I did it for my post back, like those are the only collections that exist, especially when we think about what are preserved at the Library of Congress, what are preserved in more federal archives. Like there's not much. Like even trying to find publicly accessible footage there, I think that's what surprises me. I would think there would be more, but the SNCC Digital Gateway is one of my favorite ones that exists right now.
Great, thank you. A few more questions here. Let's see, I'll read this one out for you. This is from Anna, are there any contemporary women today who can compare to keep things moving?
Hmm. Someone I wanted to include in this presentation, she was actually a mentee of Georgia Gilmore. Her name is Martha Hawkins, and she still lives in Montgomery, Alabama. And she still does this work as well. Like she runs her own restaurant, and she does community organizing as well. As far as other people who do similar work in third spaces. I feel like my problem with being a historian is that I'm so often stuck in the past. It's so hard for me to think about contemporary people. So that's something I'm still actively working on. But I would definitely say, like, just thinking of the people who are descendants now, like most of Leah Chase's grandchildren still work at Dookie Chase. I had the pleasure of meeting her granddaughter, so I know they are still heavily involved in the community as well, and still do organizing. So yeah, I think about a lot of their descendants, like Georgia Gilmore's grandson. He's also trying to open up a school because he wants children in the South to be more involved in art. So I just think about the legacy that they bring to their descendants. So I know their descendants are still doing a lot of that work.
Okay. Oh, there's some more Q&A. Let me see here. Okay. Here's from Zanetta Banks. I enjoyed the history lesson at my old age. I thought Rosa was the main force behind the bus boycott. Okay, more comment. Let me see. Um, when it comes to Rosa Parks, were there any other events that she was a part of that aren't talked about?
I would definitely say her being involved in that campaign behind Reese Taylor. I won't describe um the events of Reese Taylor because it's extremely graphic. I just encourage people, if they want to know more about it, to look it up. But it was a huge driving force of an anti-rape campaign in the South just because of the things that happened to her in the recovery and just how it shifted the way that I would just say it was the 1940s to 1950s Me Too movement. So I would encourage everyone to do more research about that.
Hey, great. Let me see. Okay. Someone shouted out Stacey Abrams.
Mm.
Okay. Yeah, it's too bad that Claudette, just transitioned recently. She she was alive and kicking for a long time. Um, and she lived in Parkchester in the Bronx for like
Yeah, I was gonna
a
say that she lived in the
while.
Bronx for a while.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I wanted to speak with her, but by the time I started here at the Historical Society, she'd already moved back to Alabama.
Hmm.
But would have been amazing to speak with her because
Yeah.
I think when she moved up here, I believe she was very involved in the nurses union. That's a
Hmm.
whole nother thing.
Yeah, and a lot of them still remained like involved in many different organizings, even when they moved and separated themselves from like more formal organizations like the NAACP. I also tried, to get into contact with Claudette when I was doing my post back, but rightfully so, a lot of organizers kind of keep their contact close to them. They don't want to just speak to any and everyone because most people are trying to talk to them and not everyone does it with good intentions. So I
That's
just took it
right.
on the chin.
That's right. That's right. All right, folks. Other questions? Anyone else brave enough to come and ask a live question here? Love to hear if there's anyone else has any other questions. Now is your chance. Okay. Well, Talia, what do you say here? Should we call it a night?
Yeah, thank you so much everyone for attending. I will definitely send an email afterwards. And yeah, thank you all for attending. Have a great night.
And thank you so much for leading us through this history. Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you.